haters, 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 haters.
So this is my tutorial on Mofaux. The tune is called Haters, out on South Point, and we're in Hastings at the STL studio. And this is my run through of my tune Haters. Right, so track we'll be doing is Haters, and it's off my EP that by now hopefully is already out on South Point. With this tune, I found the vocal would be the first thing I did. I'll just grab that vocal for you. Apologies in advance if my laptop has a funny 5 minutes. So on a couple of the vocals, I've already had plugins on it and done a bit of editing and then bounced it down. So this is the vocal, and I think I either found it on YouTube in the video. It's probably from Splice actually, if I'm honest. Just play that quickly.
Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my style. Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my style. Haters trying to jag.
So just literally repeat that, just to get a little bit of a catchy vocal in there and fill out the space. Yeah. On that, plugin wise, done it in a bit of a funny order actually, but I'll show you.
Haters trying to jag my style,
So
trying to jag my style.
probably a
Haters,
tiny
style.
bit of EQ on this. Yeah, just a tiny bit of EQ. Just take out the low ends like everyone does for basically everything. And a slight dip in the mid. I would imagine it's probably just something I didn't like.
Haters trying to jag my
Yeah,
style.
just a bit of a peak there. Then I've got Nectar 2, which is, if you don't know, it's I believe isotope vocal editing, and it's pretty nice. I've got a preset on it, one that comes installed. I accidentally renamed it though, so if you're looking within Nectar, I don't know what it was originally called. I renamed it as Hard for some reason. And with Nectar,
Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my style.
basically just gives
trying to jag my style.
a little bit more oomph to the vocal, and then just to switch it up a bit more and make it sound a bit more distorted.
Haters
There's
trying to
just
jag my
overdrive
style.
on there.
Trying to jag my
That's just Logic's overdrive there. I did, we were just talking about it earlier, my computer is getting on a bit, and a few of my original plugins with Logic have decided to save and open in a very funny way. So this also is not how I think overdrive opens if you're on Logic and you open it up, but this is how I have to use it. So I've just cranked the drive up to about 16 dB. I tried to find a sweet spot for the tone, but if I'm honest, looks like I've cranked it all the way up.
haters trying to jag my style,
Let me just see what
trying to
it
jag
sounds
my
like.
style. Haters trying to jag my style,
Yeah, okay,
trying to
because
jag my style.
if you have the tone too low in the vocal, it just gives it that kind of muddy, low pass kind of sound. So I put it all the way to the top.
Haters trying to
Just
jag
give it
my
that, just a typical distorted overdrive effect that I thought sounded quite nice. And this track, it's off the 3-track EP. This one, I wanted it to be a bit more typical dance, a bit more typical of my Mofaux production, because the other 2 tracks were slightly different, were slightly more, I don't want to say creative, but a bit different. I strayed away from what I usually do. This is more like one of my normal bass house kind of heavy tracks. So I'll just play it.
Trying to jag my style. Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my style. Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my style. Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my style. Haters trying to jag my style, trying to jag my haters, haters, haters.
So it's got that typical, I don't like to say any names because people try and relate it, but I'll say Lorenzo, Taiki New, like, also new people like New Bass. It's got that kind of house sound to it. 126 BPM. Let's have a look at the effects. This down here, this was basically a bunch of effects that I've just bounced down together to clean it up, and also to just help it run a bit better because all the processing's already done. I don't which is why the channel's completely empty. I should be able to kind of work out what kind of processing would be on it. So I'll just have a listen to this quickly. All it's going to be is a bunch of random effects. Let's have a listen. Yeah, so one of the main things in this style of music that I've realised is that a lot of the people at the top and a lot of people making the kind of better sounding music, in my opinion, they use a lot of effects and a lot of fillers just to kind of shift themselves away from everyone else. So you make the straight kind of normal bassline bass house song, but then it's those slight bits that people put in, like Chris Lorenzo does, that separates it from the rest because it's just something else there. And so in here it's just a bunch of effects, a bunch of risers. That was a riser I think I made myself. Yeah, that would have been made either on Serum or Massive. And then that one coming in there, that one is actually a sample that I found from Splice as well, but I just pitched it so it just pitched down and down and down. Yeah, and that sound there, I'm trying to get in basically all of my tunes just to give you something that when it hits your ear, you know it's one of my tunes, if that makes sense, rather than just having my name as the, like before the drop or something. I'd rather have something a bit more subtle, just a sound or an effect. So that vocal was just a cut from a huge vocal bit, but just that one little chop I really like. So I'm trying to put it in every tune I can at the minute. If we look at the drums very quickly, 2 kicks layered. One will be, there's not much on that, but this one, just a low thumping one. I would usually put a little compression on it. I probably, if there's not one there, it's because I've tried it and it didn't quite work with the rest of the instruments. But I would imagine on kick 2 I've decided to use an overdrive instead. Just solo all of the drums and have a listen through. Again, very straight beat. The hats come in a bit later, and I believe with the hats I did shift it, so I tried to give it a bit of a swing, but not a lot. Give me 1 second. So in that I've also got a ride going on as well. The whole ride thing, you hear it in a lot of tunes, but it was Tengu that put me onto it, is that instead of just having another hi-hat or something, a ride, it just fills up more, gives it a bit more of a drive, in my opinion. The snare and the clap, let's have a look. So there's a couple claps and a couple snares layered, or 1 snare, 2 claps. I think these 2 claps, I think I've resaved them after doing a bit of processing, but these are from a Hybrid Theory pack. They do really good sample packs for anyone looking, and they're good guys as well. So looking at the claps, first one, let's just solo it and see what it sounds like. I would say in this style of music, your claps and snares, they are important. A lot of people starting out, they're getting clips from sample packs and they're just kind of laying them on top with no consideration as to how they actually sound together. They're just layering them and layering them. You need to really listen to it and make sure you're EQing to counterbalance the frequencies of both of them. But these two claps, I actually know I've already done that before and processed them. Would be nice to show you that, but it's already done. I don't know where the project is. But now on the first one, so this is the higher frequency, as you can see, a completely low cut. This is FabFilter Pro Q2, by the way, EQ, and I swear by it. I used to just use the Logic built-in one, but there's something about being able to see the live frequencies as it's playing when you preview it, like so. It's just really good. It gives you a great idea about where the track's sitting, where the audio is, and where the frequencies are. So that dip there, that would have just been a frequency that I'm not too fond of as well. I have a pitch shift on it, so let's just listen, see what the clap was saying without the pitch shift and why I did it. Okay, yeah. Let's just have a look at that and see if that's doing anything right. So it's only down by 3 semitones, and I'm sure that if I listen to it through, that's just so that it fits in with the mix a bit nicely. The original sample was probably just not hitting my ear quite how I wanted it to. And then again, I think this project I went a bit crazy with the overdrive because it seems to be on everything, but if it works, it works in my opinion. Sometimes you have to just go with what sounds good and not get too caught up over the fact I haven't got the standard normal compressor on it. So it's absolutely fine with me. And this one, again, I've just got a pitch shift and an EQ. Yeah, very similar EQ again, but this one's got more lows in it. And it's pretty extreme cutting it out there, but if we just see if I can hear it. Yeah, all it's doing is just cutting out those lows just under about 70 hertz there, which aren't really needed in the claps I used. And the snare gives it that punch. So if I were to redo this tune, one of the things I would probably give it a bit more emphasis on the compressor. So just to give it a bit more of a bit of a slap. But this is Logic's compressor, and this is basically a plugin. This is a preset that I've used, VCA snare, and then just tweaked it slightly. Again, because the snare, yeah, I would have tweaked the attack. If you have the attack too short or long, it really messes up. It sometimes gives it a bit of a fade-in effect on the snare. So you don't want that. You want to get it just right to make it nice and punchy. Cool. I'll just show you some of the chants and things that like I said before, I used to fill it up, because without them, I'll see if I can just play a clip without those parts and you'll kind of see why I put them in. Let's mute that one, mute that one. And these little ones here.
Haters. 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 Haters.
Yeah, I've even got, there's another vocal there that I can mute.
Haters. Haters.
Yeah, it just,
Haters.
and also there's a siren going on as well, very quietly on basically the last offbeat of each bar.
Haters.
So if I mute all the small parts that you think are insignificant when you're building a tune, when you're kind of first starting off, it just sounds dull. It's just one straight kick and a snare, which is what anyone can do. But it's those small bits that you add in yourself, like this here, just a very small bit of percussion to layer on the snare again. This one here, it's only at the end of the bar. Yeah, so this, if you have this add like a chant, what I like to do is add like some sort of chant or something, like a low, almost airy kind of voice to maybe the last snare of the beat or something. Gives it a bit more of a drive. It just fills it up a bit. So with all the parts.
Haters. Haters. Haters.
Just fills it up. Fills it up slightly. Is the only reason I do it. Moving on then, we'll have a quick look at, let's have a look at some of the basses. So this first one, we'll solo him. So with the plugins on, so that's just a very overly distorted, neuro-y, moving bass kind of sound that just comes in towards the end of each bar, just as the clap comes in and it stops before the first kick. Gives it a bit of a, almost like a suction onto the next bar. We'll see how I did that. Right, if I mute all these and listen to it, probably won't be able to hear it. Yeah, so there's literally nothing going on in this one's made on Massive. But all that's happening in Massive with this one really is just the movement. There's not any textures, there's not any real frequencies going on. It's just a very low moving bass. Let's have a look at it quickly. I did this one ages ago, this sound actually, and I would have just used it in here. But this, turn it down slightly. It's just a very typical moving neuro sound. We've got a triangle sine, a square sine. This would have been in the days where, I mean, I still do it now, but where you chuck a load of things in, you see what comes out, and then you try and get it to sound good. So yeah, these are interchangeable, and you can probably come up with some really nice sounds. That's something I'd advise if you're stuck and you have one sound and you've got a bit of a block going on. Just swap up some of the oscillators, but keep everything the same, and you'll get all these different sounds that you didn't expect. Got the macro controls for the vibration, vibrato, and distortion, and glide as well. Let's have a look. Yeah, there's a slight glide to it. I think it's just one note. Yeah, the one note's got the moving parts in it, and that's LFO. That's the fifth LFO, so it's just a 1/8 ratio on that. And it doesn't sound too interesting without any of the effects. So if I have a quick look at what's happening on the EQ. Right, so this is, it's kind of a funny way I've done this really, because it's such a low, heavy sound, but I've cut a lot of the lows out deliberately because it is too much for the sound that I wanted, and I've just raised a little bit in the kind of near 3000. 3000 is a nice, it's a nice frequency. Added Camel Crusher. Now, most people in the kind of scene in the music I do, they either use Camel Crusher or, I mean, there's quite a lot of distortion. Some people just crank up Sausage Fattener to the max and leave it as that. But I think Camel Crusher, especially on this preset, that patch British Clean, it gives it an all-round, the top end, it kind of boosts the top end, makes them gritty. But like it says, I don't understand the British part, but like it says clean, it does keep it clean compared to some of the other presets. And all I've done after that is just toggled around with the filter and the distortion. I would probably leave these two as is. I'll just listen to it with just the EQ and the Camel Crusher. Okay, so I mean, all that's done, if I bypass it and play it again. Yeah, it's, I mean, you can hear that the level goes quite a bit higher, and it just kind of brings out those frequencies that I wanted to hear more in the movement of it, because where it sits in the track, I just wanted just a heavy bass sound to come in and move slightly, but it to be quite short. So I found Camel Crusher worked quite well to bring out those frequencies in a short amount of time. And then on top of that, I put probably my favourite plugin at the moment, and I know a lot of people are using it, is Saturn, FabFilter's Saturn. It's saturation, but it's it's quite a simple one to get used to when you can, if you're kind of just getting into it. I like to go, there's a preset basic saturator, and it just splits it into two. I like having just move the top end and the lower end. You can add more meters in it if you want to, if you've got quite a dynamic sound. But with this sound, all I wanted to do was, I mean, I've slightly boosted the low saturation, but mainly the high again. And I think this is probably what gives it most of the volume and most of the punch. If I just play you in kind of, if I play you in the sound, because my laptop would just prefer it. You can see if I bypassed the saturator, there's still kind of some graininess in it, but not nearly as much as what I wanted. So it's not very nice to hear it just like that out of context, but within the tune, it just worked really well to have that overly distorted, modulated bass sound. And then on top of that, as I said earlier, Sausage Fattener's always a favourite. And then this Space Designer, this is, I think, a small space. So I love, on a lot of my basses, I don't know how to describe it, but what I try and do is I give it a really quick reverb, really short, small room kind of reverb, and it kind of it adds more frequencies to it. It almost sounds like you're adding harmonies to it, even though I don't think you quite are, but it works really nicely. If I play, If you hear that, and then if I put the small reverb on it, it makes it sound more closer, if that makes sense, especially when you've got headphones on. I produce mainly on headphones. And it adds another effect to a sound that you don't hear in much music. I think recently people are doing a bit more short, quick delays or very short reverbs. A lot of people do them on claps. Quick delays on claps are good because it almost gives you the stereo effect. But I like to use it on my basses, not too much, just slightly. And I would imagine, yeah, one thing is that you don't want to, if you're going to add any reverb to any sort of bass, just make sure you're taking out all the low ends, because no one wants a muddy sounding bass. And on top of that, I just used, that would be a larger reverb, just to give it some space, and then just a compressor and a limiter. And then you just get that horribly over distorted bass sound that fits nicely in the song. So this next one, this is the high, so it's always good practice to layer. Excuse me while I wipe my eyes, I've got dry eyes by the way. It's always good to layer your sounds. Most people do it now. It's just good practice to do. Otherwise your bass sound that you're trying to spend for ages to make really heavy and really punchy, it's just not as strong as ones that you'll hear when you reference to other people, and that's because you need to layer them up. This will just be the high. That's just the high. You can hear there's quite a lot of saturation on there, and it gives it a tail, which I quite like. If I just if I take the saturation off, there's still a bit of a tail. I think I've got noise on as well on massive. Let me have a look quickly. Yeah, so I've got some white noise on massive. I don't know. Yeah, if you hear that tail at the end, that's what I liked about adding the noise with the saturation, because the saturator brought it out. So that's, as you can hear, that's just the high end. If I look at the EQ, hopefully, yeah, so completely cut. I'm trying to get more. I'm trying to get tighter mixes, and at the moment, whilst I'm trying different things, a lot of the time, I'm cutting as far as I can to my ear until it starts to lose the sound that I want, because I just don't see the point of having frequencies in there that you can see but not hear, because it will muddy it up. Sometimes you can definitely go over the top and over EQ things that don't need to be EQ'd, but for the large majority, if you trust your ear and not just what you see on the screen, like that gives it a completely different sound. That's not what I would have wanted, because I've got another layer of this sound, so I would have just roughly about there. And then again, Saturn really brings out the high end, which is what you want to do with a lot of these basses, just to bring them out. Another short reverb. I try and get a lot of my plugins, with the different bass lines, I try and get the plugins to be similar and in a similar order, so that it almost sounds like I've bust them and that they're all playing throughout one channel or something, because they're similar. There'll be different original sounds in massive. There'll be different different oscillators, different things going on, but the effects, I like to try and keep them to a similar list, just so it all fits nicely together and there's not too many variations going on. We've got a spreader on that as well. Yeah, straight away you can hear, if you're listening in stereo, that it splits the frequencies and separates them, and that when it's layered with a lower sound, if you split the high frequencies, it just gives it a much rounder kind of effect, a fuller sound to go by. So, and then there's just a simple compressor on there as well. Going on to the low end bass, I should say really before coming today, I'm not actually this prepared usually when I get into a tune. All these labels that I've got for the songs I did on the way here on the train, reason being is because when I'm explaining it to you guys, it's much easier. And I would definitely recommend, like most people say, that it is a key to kind of arrange your songs whilst you're doing them. The reason that this one was originally pretty messy is because I got into the flow of things, and when you do that, you don't want to waste your creative time arranging and naming your files rather than actually going with what you're coming out with naturally. So on the train here, I'm not always this. I mean, it's not even that prepared, but I'm not always this organised. So if I go to main bass low, this will literally just be. There's not much going on there. It's just the other layer to go with the sound we just showed you. And that one, yeah, well, okay, that's very extreme EQ. And again, I would just done it because there's also a sub going on as well, so I cut the low end so it didn't match with the sub. And then I literally just wanted this in the higher one. There was definitely this around about a 300 kind of point EQ that was missing. So again, like I said, I cut the top and the bottom. I wouldn't usually recommend to do this because it's quite extreme, but I have done it and the song is done. So that's that. And it worked. If it works, it works at the end of the day, which a lot more people are starting to say, which is quite refreshing because you can definitely get too caught down on, I suppose, the rules of what people say you should do when you're making music. Obviously, you need to check it with an equalizer, or check it with something, some sort of meter to make sure it isn't all over the place and your ears aren't lying to you. But if it's all good, it's all good. And again, that's just got Camel Crusher, Sausage Fattener, and Saturn, which are my kind of go-to for this sort of bass. This one. That's a Serum preset I made. I'll show you in a second, but that's creating the main melody for it, the kind of melody that's going on, and then I've got 4 instances of the same sound. And the reason I do that is because every one of them is slightly different. So all I did is I made the main bass on here, on Serum. Let's just open that very quickly. So you might see that it's called Shady Battle. Reason being is at the time of making it, Slim Shady by Distinct was out and Battle by Cause and Effect VIP had just kind of come out as well. Oh no, sorry, Slim Shady wasn't out, but everyone was listening to it. And there was that main sound they had, which is it's kind of similar to this, which is why it was called it. Everyone was loving it, including me. It was just a really nice high-end bass sound. It sounded quite simple, but the melodies they could do with it all harmonised together. It was nice. So this was my attempt at that sort of sound. It strayed quite far from it, which is what I wanted. But it's quite simple. So all it is, 1 octave down, dirty saw, well, 2 dirty saws within Serum. Really not touched the dials on this one. Because it just loses it if I change the wave position, wave table, sorry. Unless I get back to the center, it kind of loses what I wanted. I like that start. The sync, I won't touch the sync window because this I've already moved to get this sound, and if you move it even the slightest bit, you'll just get something completely different and really horrible and tinny sometimes. But sometimes if you just chuck on the sync window and then try and find that real sweet spot, you sometimes get the sounds that you can't quite get from using just the oscillators and the effects. I just doubled them up, so the one's just 1 oscillator lower, just to give it a bit of thickness to it. Nothing going on, the sub is separate, so that's off. Noise is on, but pointless because it's not. And then I've just got a low filter with a bit of cut off there. Let's have a look. With the LFO. Oh, sorry, the LFO, I'm lying. The LFO is on the noise. It's very quick though, so you may not be able to hear it, but within the song you can. It almost fades in the noise. Now I like to add noise to basses, the higher end basses, just because it gives a really nice kind of scratchy in a nice way feel. Scratchy is probably not the right word, but it just adds a nice top end to it again. And yeah, I've also automated with the same LFO, the low filter, the low pass. So that's what gives it its movement in that there. The effects is probably just maybe a hyperdimension. Yep, just a hyperdimension. Without it, So it's not really doing much because this is saved, and I'm kind of counterproductive adding some of the presets because it would have meant that that wouldn't work too well. But it's there from when I use it in other projects, because I'll use this sound again and switch it up and change it in other projects, because it's always good to try and keep one sound to yourself and introduce it in other songs, like I do with that small sample, the vocal, just so when people hear it they know it's one of your tunes as opposed to anyone else making similar music. So that's that patch. It's super simple, to be honest, because the majority of the oomph and the hard work goes in the plugins. So if I just A/B it with all the effects off, I'll probably have to turn this up as well. I'll keep the EQ on, but the harmony of what I wanted in it is still there, but the grittiness, the high end, the dirtiness of it is gone. And that would have been, again, Camel Crusher. Instantly, it's about 4 times as loud. Sounds like British Clean again. Yeah, British Clean. Let's see. Not too much distortion on it. Filter cut off all the way up to try and get the highs in again. I don't like to touch the resonance because you get that ringing sometimes. And that's about it on the Camel Crusher. Saturn's probably the main one on this, I think. So it does add some, actually. Maybe on this one it's not as much. You can hear with Saturn, you can really go over the top. I mean, if you control it, you get some really good sounds and some really nice dynamics in the higher end. I don't so much touch the low end of saturation, just because it really muddies up a track sometimes. I'm sure some people get on with it really well. But that's pretty much the sweet spot for me. Don't touch these as of yet, but fingers crossed, if I do another one of these tutorials, I'll know exactly what they do and I'll be a pro at them. So look out for that. But then I've got the Logic's distortion. That's quite nice, actually. So the distortion in this, it almost sounds like it's doubling up a track or something and squashing it together. It's almost that same effect that I tried to do with the short reverb. It makes it sound, it's got less of a tail. It stops quickly because of the distortion. Sausage fattener will just be to fatten the sausage and make it louder. And then we've got the short, I know this is because I always do it in this order. I'll do short space designer, so short reverb, and then the longer reverb afterwards. So with those two, I'll take that one off. Yeah, it just gives it that effect. And like I said, a lot of the time I produce with my headphones. When you've got your headphones on and you've got the short space designer doing the short reverb, it's just, it sounds really nice. It is, like I said, it's like a stereo short delay going between your ears at the same time, if that makes sense. So it's really hard to describe the kind of sound that it is, but I'd just recommend that if you're at home and you're making a sound. I do it on vocals sometimes. I do it on mainly basses. On plucks, it's really nice. So there isn't any sort of pluck kind of thing in here. Actually, let's see. So this effect is in the intro and it comes back in during the breakdown. It will have probably just been a loop I found. Again, probably Splice. Recently I've been using Splice a lot because I've got so many credits on it. I just download anything at this point, just random sounds, because if you just download the stuff that everyone's getting that's on the top of the charts and all of that, everyone's going to end up sounding the same. So if you've got the credits to spare, go through Splice, download some random sounds. Sometimes I don't even listen to them before I get them because I have that many spare, and then I'll use them. And this was one of them. It's just literally a percussive loop. I'll play it through. And all it is, it's panning between the two speakers. I don't know what sound you want to call it. It's almost like a knocking, but it sounds like a lot of the actual punch of the knock has been taken out of it. So I did that, and I've added the short space designer reverb to it, And again, with headphones, you can hear it with speakers, but more so with headphones, it just brings it in a bit more, and it makes the effect sound more present. And yeah, if you use it on plucks, it sounds really nice. It gives like another dimension to the pluck, or like an arpeggiator or something. It works really nicely with, in my opinion, and I am a bit of a sucker for using it as much as I can for that sort of thing. Going back to the basses, so like I said, I've got those, that one we just spoke about. The only other things on there are a bit of a longer reverb, probably medium reverb, and a compressor again. Going back to the basses, like I said, they're all the same, but they're all different. Same but different. They're all the same Serum plugin. I've just tweaked a couple of effects on them, and I think one of them, I have a feeling it might be within Serum, but one of them has a phaser on it, and I think it's the third one maybe. Yeah, that's got a slight phaser on it just to make it a different sound. So we go from that sound there. It's almost like the original one I made. That one which has less of the high end, a bit more grit towards the mid. And what they do is they play the same melody, one after the other, to get that repetition, but the sound changes slightly just to give it a bit of creativity, a little bit of difference in it when you're listening. Yeah, so this one, you can hear there's a phase going on in the sound. One thing that was kind of annoying with that is that you will find if you use it, if you haven't set it properly and you play it through, when you bounce it down, it may start or finish at a different point. The actual the phaser may start or finish at a different point when you're doing it. So just keep that in mind when you're using it. And the last one, same again, but that one has just got quite a bit more reverb on it. Right, so this one here, I think it's played quite low. So that, on its own, again, out of context, doesn't sound too exciting, but if you've listened to the tune, you can hear it sitting quite nicely. Is a massive preset that I was playing about with again years ago, and all I've done is I've tweaked some of the settings in it and some of the plugins attached to it. So let me have a listen to it again without the effects. So a sound that I couldn't imagine in any song, to be honest. That's what you need to remember when you're making a song. If you're making a sound and you're kind of being a bit disheartened about how it sounds when you have no plugins attached to it, don't be too disheartened, because a large majority of producers will do most of their sound design within the plugins rather than in the preset. Within the original Massive or whatever you're using. It's good to get as close as you can to the sound, but you'll probably never get the absolute finished sound that you expect to hear out of just using Massive or a different plugin. So this one, I think, if I play it, I remember making this years ago actually, this sound, Blur, just a typical name, probably back when we were doing a bit more dubstep kind of stuff. And it's very simple, it's a very basic sound, all it is. Just a square and a kanga, which is just one of Massive's random oscillators, sounding quite nicely. Detuned it by 9, which is kind of weird, but that's what gives it it's almost like it gives it deliberate phasing issues, which gives it some movement. Very simple sound. Again, you can hear the noise. I've got tape noise on this one. You can toggle through them. I would recommend to try a few different noise types and see if anything works as well, because I find that noise gives it that tail, like I said before, just at the end, which it kind of just changes the sound, gives it another dimension again. Probably not too much more going on within this one. No, not overly complicated. It's always good if you can to keep them simple. It's just a low pass, the LFO again, just to give it the movement, and then a bit of a tube distortion, and a dimension expander, probably not doing too much. Yeah, on this sound, within these limits, is not doing too much. But then when we add Saturn, you start to get the crunch of the highs coming through quite a bit. Again, not ideal. Camel Crusher is working quite a lot in this sound. Yeah. And then I would imagine, so you can hear it straight away, it's another short. I really like using the short reverb. It's probably one of the things I don't talk about too much, because I never think it's that important when I'm talking with producer friends or something. But realistically, when you start looking at your own tunes and you start realizing what's in it, all of my tunes, there'll be something with that short reverb, because I don't know, it gives it something a bit fresh. The sub, I never do anything to my subs. I keep them clean. Make sure you're taking the below 20, 19, 20s out frequencies, because it's just mud. Top end, there was no need. I think this one, I very much doubt I made this sub unless it's literally just a sine wave. No, this is a sub. This is a preset. Don't know how long I've had it, but it worked quite nicely within here. Completely honesty, I don't touch any of this. I would have probably I usually turn a lot of it off. So the subs that you download, there's just so much going on and it's not needed. Usually I'll just use a sine wave, but for whatever reason, when I made this tune, I chose this sub and stuck with it. All that's going on is that this sub is a bit more. There's a bit of distortion going on, which is something I very rarely do in subs. There's tube distortion slightly, and I've even got an override as well. Overdrive, sorry. Doing the same thing. Let's listen to that sub without them. Let's listen to that. So as you could probably imagine, everyone knows what a sub sounds like. It's just a sine wave and that's it. If I add the overdrive, just straight away, I mean, for a lot of songs that won't work and you want to avoid it at all costs, but for this one, it did. It worked. It worked with the rest of the basses I was using. There was enough space in the frequency range for me to do that. So I did it. If I put a compressor on, I just find sometimes you add a little bit of overdrive, not too much. Don't go over the top. It can work quite nicely. We'll talk about the last bass of the track, which only comes in at the end of every 2 bars, basically. And it's always smart in your arrangement to, towards the end of each bar, switch it up a bit, add a different sound in there, break it up, take something out, just to let the listener know that you're moving on to the next part, and so that it's not all the same and too repetitive. So let's have... So this bass here is just a falling neuro-funky kind of sound. Just a simple bass sound. Again, this one's in massive. I'll open that. A lot of the ones I like to do are in serum, but when I started this tune, I had already made a lot of sounds that I knew I wanted in it. I just needed to tweak them. So this was just a neuro sound I made a while ago, with a pitched kind of saw-ish wave going on. And then I've got a filter here on LFO 6, which is a funny ratio actually, 3/16. That would have just been trial and error. Because if you were to ask me to count 3/16, I would have no idea how to count 3/16 in my head right now. No, I couldn't do it. So that would... Yeah, it just gives it that nice falling rhythm to go along with the pitch falling as well. And that's just the kind of thing I like at the end of each section or phrase or whatever it might be. Less of a melody, more of just a bass sound to go by to lead you into the next part. Let's have a look. Yeah, again, nothing else going on. This is what I mean. I can't stress that it's quite easy to get a sound that you're happy with not too much going on, because you can overcomplicate things a lot. There's tube, there's a distortion on here, so without the distortion, It's just like almost like a falling sub, or just really a falling low end, but with the distortion, you can hear it almost struggling to kind of push everything out, and that's what gives it most of its bulk in that. And then there's just another reverb there, just simple on that chain, just EQ, probably taking out the lows. Yep, taking out the lows, and then that's not actually on that one there. No, so there's a reason it's not on, because it takes away from all the sound. But because this sound, as you can see here, this sound's on its own, so I would have listened, I would have seen what it looks like when it's playing, and apart from maybe if I wasn't lazy, I'd get rid of maybe some of these bits here that are just they're a bit higher than the rest. I would have kind of leveled it out slightly, but there's not need to do too much because it's playing on its own. There's nothing for it to really clash with. There's also not a sub. I left the low end in, apart from minus 20 hertz. I left the low end in because I wanted the sub to move along with it, and it worked as part of the last part of the bar even. So that's that. Now, if we look at the arrangement, I would also recommend to colour code. As you can clearly see, I haven't. It does help. I've got a lot of projects where I have colour coded, and not only do I usually get them done a bit quicker, when someone asks me then to send them the stems, it's so much easier. It's just good. It's just being prepared. Just colour code them, unlike I have done in this one. Name them, you'll be laughing. So as far as the structure goes, most tunes that I'm doing at the moment, like a lot of people, they're dropping at about 33 bars in. It seems to be the standard. So you get a nice intro, a nice little build, and then the drop. The intro, if we just go right to the start, it does start actually. It's got like half a bar and nothing, because this is made for an EP. Originally, I wanted this song first on the EP, just to kind of hit with quite a hard tune as the first one, because then the other two, then one of them's quite aggressive as well, but the other one's not as, which I was going to end on. As this is probably going to be shown after the EP is out, I think this is the second song on the EP, Haters, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is. But the reason I did it is that at the beginning I have just a reversed vocal, which is the Haters vocal. I just find which the main vocal here.
Haters trying to jag my style.
That all I did, I doubled up the track. I added a ton of reverb and delay, and I listened to it, and when you listen to that, it doesn't really sound like much when it's just got loads of reverb and delay on. It just goes on forever. But what I've done, if you can just about see, is I've then cut the words of it off, the haters. I've just got the tail, and then I reverse it, so it builds up rather than fading out. So it sounds like this. And then that just leads into it saying haters. So all it is just the tail end of the vocal flipped, and it just gives it a nice build. And that's all that's in the very beginning of the song, and it just leads into it. So for any DJs looking to play this song, make sure you just skip ahead a bit and don't just cue it on the first beat, because it will not work. So yeah, skip past that. But on that, just to crank it up, because when you're bouncing down just the tail end of the vocal, it's very quiet. You can see the signal is tiny on there. It just was. I could probably have cranked it up a bit before bouncing it, but it was very small. So on here, I've just got the same effects, because I recorded it dry apart from the reverb and the delay. I've then re-added the effects on that I've got on the original vocal, the nectar, the overdrive. It's low passing in as well. If I look at, it's not low passing in, it's just actually low pass slightly. Yeah, just low passed. It sounded nice. It's an intro, you don't need too much going on, and it's almost like a pre-intro. It's not even a real part of the song. But I liked it. It was a nice effect, and it made it more of a song within an EP rather than just stagnant songs. Just a tiny bit like that. What else have we got going on? So all that's happening in here is, that's the sound actually I was trying to find earlier, that plucky riser. Trying to say that too quickly. Right. This one here. It's really nice. It's just, again, it was a sample I found. Not spliced, I don't think. I didn't make this one. It was a sample I found, but it was really long. It did a load of other things. I just wanted that, the small chop of just rising, and then I wanted to repeat it, and that's all I've done. So we'll see if we can listen to it without the space designer actually, because this is the, yeah. All I can explain with that short reverb, this is the sound I wanted to show you earlier, is that it, for lack of a better description, it sounds like it's in a tiled bathroom or something, a really small tiled bathroom. And just for some of the sounds, it sounds good, and this was one of them. So that's all that's playing in the intro. It's quite empty. Reverbed, reversed vocal into normal vocal chops, some percussion elements just to keep the beat going, and effects, and that pluck, that rising pluck, just to keep a drive. Because some people are making these tunes with lots going on in the intro, which is great if you're just listening, but for my style of music it also needs to be DJ friendly, which I try and do in the intro. So after the original, well, we've got 9 bars there, and then up until, well, the 12th or 13th bar is probably my favourite part of the song, and there's nothing on it because it was a very heavily affected vocal already, and I dabbled with adding more things and taking some things away. Eventually all I did, this is another bounce down of it, all I did was take out some of the muddiness of the EQ, but apart from that there's not much more you can do because it was just very heavily filtered and processed already.
It takes more than intellect to be a musician. Put your soul in, soul in, soul in, soul in, soul in, soul in.
And I loved it. I listened to it and I was just trying to find something to fill it. And when I put it in originally, it was with more instruments. There was a drum fill. There was all sorts. But then, if it plays, I'll show you. It just sounded nice on its own. It's something a bit different. It breaks it up and takes it from the intro. It's like a transition, but a really dry, blunt transition of just a sample. So cut.
It takes more than intellect to be a musician. Put your soul in, soul in, soul in, soul in, soul in.
And then go straight into the build. Thought it worked really nicely, and it's one of those things that hopefully when you listen to the song, say someone's playing it somewhere, you'll maybe hear that bit as it's being mixed in and you'll know that it's this song because it's just blatantly there. And sometimes you can be a bit creative like that and just go against your nature and take everything out and just hear how it sounds. And it sounded nice, so I kept it as is. So that's the intro. Looking at the build, you heard it just now, all it is, one snare. Let's just listen to that snare. So it's a very typical, it sounds almost old-fashioned. There's a tail on there. It's not quite clean. I like that though. I find when I make music that's just very clean instruments or very clean samples, it's okay if I'm making maybe garage music or something like that because there's a lot of crisp, there's a lot of high end. But in this type of music, it's not muddiness that you want, but it's something a bit different that fills out those spaces. And I find sometimes it's important to make sure your sample selection reflects that and that you get good artifacts, I suppose, rather than just a very clean sound that you then have to try and add all these things to. So all the build is one snare, repeated vocal of it saying haters, and then we've got that percussion loop that I spoke about earlier, and then all I've done with the haters is I've just pitch shifted. See if it lets me play it.
Haters trying to drag my style. Trying to drag my style. Haters,
layered with the
trying to drag my
original
style.
one. There's a higher one and a lower one, just so that they kind of bounce off each other. But make sure if you're going to do that, they're obviously in tune with each other. So just do it maybe 5-7 semitones up or something, and just make them sound nice with each other. It just gives it a bit of variation in the build again. And let me see, I've got no other sounds in the build. It's nice. I like to keep the build empty. It needs to have energy in the build, so it sounds like it's being uplifted. But a lot of my songs, I put a little tease of the melody line in the build, like a lot of people do. Just found it didn't work quite well with this one. I liked it to just come in with a punch, because like I said, I did imagine this might be the first tune on the EP. It doesn't matter either way, but I like that in this song there's no introduction to that melody line. It comes in, and unless you've heard the tune before, you won't be expecting it. So I quite liked it within this tune. One thing I don't do that a lot of people do, and I say this now, and my next tune will probably have it in it, typically, but I'm not a massive fan of people using the first 4, 8, however many bars you want of just the sound. Everyone does it, and it sounds great, but you need to be a bit more creative. Don't just do what everyone's doing. With this one, it just goes straight in with a kick. I mean, if you want to wait and bring the hats in later or something, fine, but just make sure not every tune you're making has that typical 8 bars of nothingness, or just the melody line or something. Just switch it up a bit, do something different. Then we've just got the main part of the song into a smaller breakdown. Let me have a look. This is like a half kind of breakdown, just to split up the two sections. And all this is sine, so the sub, sorry, playing the same, I believe it's the same line as the rest of the song. Yeah, it's the same melody being played within the sub over the same snare that was in the build and the same vocal that was in the intro and the build. So you're just taking parts of the intro. I also use it in the outro as well, just to relate, and it's something for the listener to refer back to in the song, so you're not confusing things. And then we go straight back into the main weight of it all again, but this time we introduce the ride, I believe, which is here. Introduce the ride again. This is a ride that I'd already pre-processed and then saved and put straight in, which is why some of mine won't have any effects on. It's because sometimes if I've got something, I should have done it with a lot of these really, but if there's something that I've got loads of effects on, or there's a lot of EQing, or something that takes up a lot of my CPU, I'll sometimes just bounce it down to audio, and then I can just use it and refer back to it when I need to, because my computer does struggle sometimes. So yeah, I just did an offbeat ride to go along with the hi-hats during the second part of the first part, if that makes sense, after the little build, and it just switches it up quite nicely. Then the rest of the song, it's a bigger breakdown. This I like to always keep the main breakdown as empty as possible, apart from these effects. So this, if I skip to, let's say here, this will be the same sub bass line again. We just have a look. Yeah, so it's the same sub bass line again as the rest of them, and that's just to keep that melody in someone's head whilst they're listening, even if it is just the sub doing it. Because if you're at a rave, or you're at a club or something, everyone loves the sub. Everyone loves, if there's a breakdown, if you have just a breakdown with just the effects and just a vocal or something, it's nice. But if you have that sub that creeps in after 2 bars here, it builds up a bit of excitement. But again, we just go straight into another 2 bars of sub. We've got the snare build as always, and then the vocal and the rest of the percussive elements as well, just building up until the final kind of part here, the drop. Which this would just be, this is basically just an A, B, A, C kind of section. So this will be a copy of the first one. And what I do with my drums or my fills is that I just switch it up a bit. So say for instance you've got one rhythm, say here in the first part you have a typical like or something, or just a straight rhythm. Just switch it up a little bit when you go into the second half. You don't have to always in every single song, which again I have to try and avoid it sometimes because it's nice to do, but You don't want to change everything in the second drop just for the sake of it. If the song is good enough in the first drop, keep it. You don't need to change everything. Change some things just to keep it interesting. Change the drums, change the fills. Just something as simple as that will do. And that then brings us to the outro. The outro just consists of the fact, this is probably, if you look at most of my songs, it will be this kind of formula for the outro. It's the sub that's been playing throughout the whole time, maybe one bass, which is this one here, which is the down pitched neuro sound with the full drums. Fingers crossed it will play. So it's that. Oh, there's also the ride. I did have it as a straight ride on every offbeat, but then I realised in the outro it sounds nice to just have the ride on every other offbeat. There, and it just sounded really nice. Gives it a bit of a drive. And that's essentially it for the outro. You don't need to be too crazy again, because you need to remember people might be trying to mix this song into another song. And if you start throwing them curveballs everywhere, they're not going to play your song again. And that's essentially it. Thanks for watching. That's the end of the video. Make sure you check out my socials. It's Mofaux UK on most things. SoundCloud, Spotify. Mofaux spelled M-O-F-A-U-X. Also, this song is off my latest EP out now on South Point Records called Make It Go. Thanks for watching.